Big news today. Trump announces massive lawsuits against digital media censors, Twitter and Facebook. And of course, there are some people who say right away and foolishly, oh, Trump can't do that. These platforms have Section 230 protection, Dinesh. Well, Section 230 protection only immunizes these social media platforms from being sued over content that is allowed on those platforms. So if somebody, for example, libels me on Facebook, I can file a lawsuit against them, but I can't sue Facebook for allowing that content to appear. That's what Section 230 protection means. But it doesn't mean that Twitter is protected, for example, for statements, let's say libelous statements made by Twitter. Trump can certainly sue Twitter over that. It also doesn't mean that Twitter can't be sued, or Facebook, for violations of their contract with users. When you sign up for these platforms, there's a mutual contract. And Twitter and Facebook are bound by the terms of the contract as we are as users. So there are all kinds of ways, all kinds of bases for litigation that fall outside the orbit of Section 230. And the Trump lawsuit needs to be seen in the wider context of pushback, I would say global pushback against social media censorship in general, but Twitter in particular. Now, very importantly, India has just stripped its version of Section 230 protection from Twitter. And obviously, India doesn't have Section 230, but India had also immunized Twitter from content, from liability over content posted on the platform. But apparently, Twitter's been posting a whole bunch of pornography that is in violation of Indian law. India has issued multiple warnings to Twitter. These have apparently gone unheeded, and so India has taken action. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, but also the Indian high-tech minister, I believe his name is Ravi Shankar, have basically said, sorry, Twitter. Ravi Shankar Prasad has basically said, that's it. Twitter is now liable. And there's apparently there's a case involving a user who has complained about defamatory tweets, and India is now allowing that lawsuit to go forward. By the way, the Indian government has also filed multiple criminal cases against Twitter, and these are related to child pornography. And this is a way of saying that these countries are saying enough. You might remember a few weeks ago, Nigeria banned Twitter because they had stripped down the posts of the Nigerian prime minister. And think about this. You've got countries that are trying to engage in democratic debate. Twitter suppresses that debate. Meanwhile, it allows things like pornography and child pornography to slide. So even in the United States, I mean, when Trump was banned on these platforms, I don't think people grasped the full significance of the ban because we have a two-party system. And think about it. These platforms all say, we're promoting democratic debate. And then you ban permanently the leader of one of the two parties. What does that mean? I mean, that basically means you're allowing only one party to have its say. How's that different from what happens with digital censorship in places like North Korea, which is a one-party state, or China, which is a one-party state? So there are chilling global ramifications here. Now, when Nigeria banned Twitter, Trump basically said, this is fantastic. Lots of countries should do the same. And of course, we heard from some conservatives, this is becoming an increasingly tedious habit of conservatives, but also from some of the familiar never-Trumper types. Oh, Trump is being so inconsistent. You know, he's not standing on principle. Trump himself was complaining about digital censorship, and now he's calling for countries to ban Twitter. This makes no logical sense. Now, this is the point I want to investigate, because there's a statement that Aristotle makes, I believe in the Politics, or in the Nicodemean Ethics, I'm not sure, where he says that natural right is changeable. Now, this is a statement that has puzzled me for years. because natural right has to do with the division between right and wrong. And what Aristotle seems to be saying is that natural right is not some absolute. It doesn't exist in stone or in the sky. Rather, what's right and wrong depends on the complexity of a given circumstance. And here's the point I want to make, which is that if you look at the greatest threats to free speech in the world, and you were to enumerate them, 1, 2, 3, you'd have to say the greatest threat is Xi Jinping. He's the greatest danger to free speech worldwide. Number 2, I would have to say Mark Zuckerberg. Number 3, Jack Dorsey. So these are the 3 greatest threats to free speech globally. They represent, if anything, the 3 faces of tyranny. And so anything that strikes against them, that undermines them, that weakens them, that dissolves their ability to do this with impunity is good. How can you possibly say that, China practices censorship, but anyone who goes after the Chinese Communist Party and calls for suppression of the Chinese Communist Party and its material is practicing the same kind of censorship? No, that's because there's no moral equivalence between the Chinese government, the voice of tyranny, and its opposition, which is struggling for freedom. You have a global push now against these digital censors. In some ways, you can borrow a slogan from the left. You might remember Herbert Marcuse and his idea that we should not be tolerant of intolerance. This has kind of been a leftist mantra, but I'm going to borrow it for the moment and apply it to this case, because what we have in the case of digital censorship is massive intolerance. And what Trump represents, what India represents, what Nigeria represents, is a global movement that basically says we're no longer going to be tolerant of this intolerance. And in not being tolerant of intolerance, we are, in fact, striking a pragmatic blow for free speech.